Hello, YouTube. Let me get Facebook all caught up real quick. Hello, Facebook. All right. Good evening, everybody. What's the matter? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Hello, and welcome to this Wednesday night Bible study. We are zooming at a snail's pace through Hebrews chapter 11. It's a little joke you can laugh at there. Thank you. I got a snort. I'll take it. And before we get into all that, we got our prayer requests that we're going to talk about. Let's see. Hello, Sylvia. Good evening, Amanda. Good evening, Ryan. Good to see everybody's names. Let's see. Good evening, Amanda, again on Facebook. Let's see. You guys saw some on the pre-show of some more immediate things going on in people's lives. I won't go everything we go over on Sundays, but some of the more immediate stuff I want to mention. Bobby Reynolds found a cancerous lump, and we're praying for her. Let's see. The Strange family, being prayer for them. They're on the pre-show. Some that are grieving are not on the pre-show, because I never know if people who are grieving and also watch these Bible studies, if that makes it harder for them or not. So I'm always a little cautious of that. But do be in prayer for... I know Christy and JW were out of town for her sister's funeral, so be in prayer for their family. Christy's sister passed away, and so just be in prayer for their whole family as they're going through it as well. We want to be in prayer for these. Let's see, be in prayer for Sharon Hendricks, who's dealing with some heart issues. I think that's most of the immediate things I have on my list, or at least that I can see. We're praying for Matthew Bowman and his Marine boot camp coming up, which is going to get intense as I understand it. So be in prayer for him. It takes a lot to be a Marine, so be in prayer for him. I do apologize if my voice is a little bit gravelly. We had quite the road trip yesterday, and I'm still kind of recovering. But I tried to do my vocal exercises and warm up and everything, and so hopefully I'll be easy to listen to tonight. But I appreciate you guys being here. If you guys have anything else you want us to pray for, be sure to leave a comment. Let us know. I'm trying to think. I don't think anything else. If I started teaching, don't feel like interrupting. Ask a question. Ask us to pray. Whatever you want. This is supposed to be like a less formal sort of thing that we do. So I always enjoy these things. This is not, I don't know why, but I feel like I want to say this again this evening. This is not a church service. Right? We are not holding a church service, an online church service. I don't have a problem with online church services. That's not why. It's just not what I want to do on a Wednesday night. What I want to do on a Wednesday night is more casual, just kind of sitting and talking about the Bible, praying for one another, that sort of a thing. I didn't want it to be as formal as like a Sunday morning, Sunday school, that kind of thing. So that's what we do here on Wednesday nights. And hopefully it's enjoyable for you. Hopefully it's a blessing to you in some way. But yeah, we're in Hebrews 11 tonight. I think that's all that I have. So like I said, if you guys have something, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Bible cam. You guys on YouTube will be first because your button's right here. All right. And then you Facebook friends. There we go. All right. Now, before we get too far into this, I do want to encourage you guys to click that little thumb, whether you're on YouTube or you're on Facebook. That does help us out. If you aren't in such a way where you can help the church out financially a whole lot, clicking that little thumb on our live streams is an easy, free way, doesn't cost you anything, to support the church. And you guys that do every week, I know you, I see you, and I appreciate you. So we are very grateful for our faithful YouTubers and Facebook friends. All right, so we're jumping into this, Hebrews 11. We've talked about this bit here, these three verses, 17 through 19, as the story of Genesis 22, Mount Moriah, Abraham offering up Isaac, and we talked about that at great length. It's one of my favorite stories. I love, because there's so much depth to looking forward to Christ and some of the names you read in that story. It's a beautiful story. If you missed that lesson, I would encourage you at some point, just go back. And if nothing else, just listen to it. You might not be able to watch the video, but if nothing else, just listen to it. It's sometimes good as well. I know on my phone there's a setting where if I've got a headphone in, I can like lock my phone and just listen to whatever video is going. Especially on YouTube, I think is a setting I can do that for. But you may have to have the subscription, so never mind about that. Maybe Facebook will let you do that. Anyway, we are here. We are in Hebrews 11, verse 20 tonight. And it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now, this has said a whole lot with a whole little. And yes, that's a phrase, a whole little, believe me. Just take my word for it. Don't look it up. But what you don't realize is, before diving into the story, this has explained some things that you don't necessarily get in Genesis 27, we're going to look at here in just a second. So this has clarified some things here in verse 20, right there. And it'll be pretty fun to look at. So let's go ahead and jump back to Genesis 27. Here we go. Genesis 27. So we're looking at Isaac now. And the story we're looking at through the Hall of Faith, anyways, that the life of Isaac is toward the end of his life. So it's going to kind of explain that in verse 1. It says, it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his eldest son and said unto him, My son. And he said unto him, Behold, here am I. And he said, Behold, now I am old, and I know not the day of my death. Now, therefore, I pray thee, take, I pray thee, thy weapon, thy quiver and thy bow, and go out to the field, and make me some venison, and make me savory meats, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. And I'm going to explain that phrase that he just said here in just a second. If you're feeling a little lost, don't worry. I'm going to fill in the gaps. And then verse 5, it says, Rebekah heard when Isaac spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it. So we've kind of got all the characters set in their stages, but what we're seeing here is that Isaac, and this is important, Isaac has called Esau to him and said, go prepare me this dish, and when you come back and we eat it together, then I'm going to give you this special blessing. Now, I'm thinking the idea here was that because obviously what we read later on is what happens is that Esau has been chosen. Esau has been chosen for a very specific and very special blessing that we're going to break down in a little bit. This obviously wasn't the way it was meant to be. This wasn't the way that God would have it work out in the long run. But this is what Isaac is going forward with. Not because he's defying God or anything like that at all, but simply because he thinks this is the way it should be done. This is the way the Lord wants it to be done. And I think we can see by the time we get to the end of the story, he's a little incorrect in his thinking. Because he's saying all this to Esau. He wants him to come before him and bring him the savory meats that he loves. So he says, bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. So that's what he's talking about, that very specific special blessing we're going to read about in more detail. Verse 5, it says, Rebekah, that's Isaac's wife, right? So that's Jacob and Esau's mom and dad. Rebekah, when Isaac spake to Esau his son, she heard it when he spake to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt for venison and to bring it. So he's doing what dad said. Well, when we come down here to verse 6, this is where the story gets interesting. Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son. You want to read this part, Amanda? You want to do a little play here? A little audiobook Bible thing? I'm getting a lot of no's. Okay. Yeah, they can. They can still hear you. They can hear you whispering now. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll do this part too. I'm just going to read it. And Rebekah spake unto Jacob her son, and notice what she says here. She says, Behold, I heard thy father speak unto Esau thy brother. So now she's talking to Jacob and explaining what just happened. I heard thy father spake unto Esau thy brother, saying, Bring me venison, make me savory meat, that I may eat, and bless thee before my death. Bless thee before the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, so honestly, that part right there, the Lord before the Lord, That's not before the Lord exists or before the Lord appears or something like that. That before means in front of. Like I'm standing before the camera. I'm standing in front of the camera. And the other before is before, like, time-wise, like before he passes away. So the same word being used within a few words of each other, but they both mean something different, right? So the Lord, in other words, all that to say, the Lord's involved. All right, I don't know why I have a tendency to break it down grammatically like that. I guess because it adds so much flavor. It's how I know what the Bible means, right? When you break it down grammatically, you know what the intention of that verse is, which is what a lot of preachers don't do, and I like to draw in the original intention. But I guess I don't need to bog everybody down with all the grammar details. Suffice it to say, the Lord's involved, right? This isn't just a generic blessing from his Father. This is a blessing that involves God. Right, and that's very important because in verse 8 he says, "Now therefore," she's saying to Jacob, "Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to that which I command thee." So she tells Jacob, "Go now to the flock and fetch me from thence 2 good kids of the goats." Those are younger goats, like not baby goats, but kid goats are younger and smaller. "And I will make them savory meats for thy father, such as he loveth. And thou shalt bring it to thy father, that he may eat, and that he may bless thee before his death." Okay, so what we have here is Rachel's intentions to defy her husband's will. Right? So anybody who tells you, well, when you read through the Bible always, all the women of the Bible, they're submissive women, they just do what they're told. No, they don't. Right? They do what God tells them to do, and if their husband's not on board, well, then they're not on board with their husband. That's what a good woman does. She doesn't blindly obey her husband like he's some sort of master lord of the household. She obeys the Lord, and if the husband's on board with that, then their partnership is going well. But a good Christian woman, she'll follow the Lord no matter what. Right? That's what we see Rebecca doing here. But the reason for it, behind it, because sometimes you read this story and you feel like you kind of understand it, but it's almost like there are pieces missing you don't quite understand. What is this blessing all about? Why is it such a big deal? And why is Rebecca going behind, Isaac's back? Why all the sneaking and the secrecy and stuff like that? Well, I think we can explain that here because, in my opinion, and several other theologians I've read as well, believe this blessing is meant to determine who's going to continue on that seed of Abraham, right? That he was promised for all those years, that he said Isaac is the fulfillment of that seed, right? It wasn't any of his other kids. It was the kid he had specifically with Sarah, right? And that was so very important. Well, Isaac and Rebekah, they both together had 2 sons. And the blessing is to determine which one of those 2 sons will carry on this Abrahamic covenant and will create what will become the nation of Israel. Right? So that's the blessing that's being determined, is who's going to carry on and get that promise. So he's determined that it's Esau, right? He's going to give that blessing to Esau. So interesting to note, it is interesting to me anyways, that originally Jacob wasn't the intended target. That Isaac wasn't going to give this blessing to Jacob. He was going to give this blessing to Esau. And can you imagine, instead of saying the nation of Israel, we might say the nation of Esau? It might still be Israel because he might have changed Israel or Esau's name to Israel as well, but it worked out the way that God wanted it to. And we know that because we know he says, "I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob." Right? He refers to them as the children of Israel. Israel was Jacob's name that changed. Right? So we know that this was God's will, that Jacob would inherit this blessing. But the way that Isaac goes about determining who's going to inherit this blessing is simply by oldest first. Their firstborn son gets the first blessing. So he was going to get, that was the only thought in this. And Rebekah, we know Rebekah's a very wise woman. We can go back to the story of Abraham's servant and with the animals and the servant and how she treated them and so forth, how she conducted herself. We know that she was a very wise woman. And we know that she's thinking about this and she knows her boys. And she's thinking, I just don't think that life, that blessing is really intended for Esau. And she's thinking about this and she's praying about it. And she says, I really think that God is intending for this for Jacob. But Isaac's determined. He says, no, Esau's the oldest. He's getting this blessing. That's all there is to it. And that's a tragic way to make a decision. Because determining God's will should never be so simple. It's not as easy as flipping a coin. God, if you want me to do this, make it heads. It's not as simple as that. Determining God's will should take some time. It should take some consideration. It should take a lot of thought and prayer. And then you determine the best decision by how God guides you in that. Right? You feel out the Holy Spirit in the way it wants you to decide. It should never be as simple as this. I tell you right now, there are pastors in churches determining who's going to preach based on nearest and most convenient humans. They're training people to preach in their churches that have never received a call from God to preach. And folks, let me tell you right now, if a man who is not called by God to preach, he should not be preaching. You need to have a testimony of a moment where you felt God call you to this. But I can also tell you that preaching isn't the only thing that God calls a person to. I had a conversation yesterday with a man who told me he worked a job for 20 years that he hated. And that he finally found a job that he loved. Let me tell you, the job had nothing to do with church, had nothing to do with the ministry at all. It was a job like any other, but it was a job that he loved, and it paid less, and it was further away, and it was more inconvenient, but it was a job he loved. And as he's describing this process of getting into this job to me, he told me just he felt God moving him, or calling him was his phrase. He said, I felt God calling me to this job. Folks, God doesn't just call people to church work, right? God will call you to do something very specific with your life. And maybe it's how you earn money. Maybe it's not. Maybe you have to take a pay cut to obey the Lord. Maybe you don't. You know, everybody's story is a little different, and that's okay. But the point is we shouldn't just be making decisions based off of what makes the most sense to us. We got to be praying about this. We got to be feeling out the Holy Spirit. It's not enough just to take the highest paying job. It's not enough just to take the job with the most potential. We got to go where God leads us to go. And sometimes, I'll go ahead and tell you, it takes a really long time to hear out if God is changing your situation. Because sometimes God just wants us to bloom right where we're planted for a long while. And you say, I prayed, I haven't heard from the Lord. If that's the case, you just continue to grow right where you're planted. And that's all there is to it. But she's understanding this, that the will of God is maybe a little more complex than her husband believes it to be. And so she's come up with this way for her to do what she feels is God's will. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. So she's come up with this plan, and she says, okay, you're going to go in, and you're going to do this, and you're going to get the blessing. Well, then Jacob responds to his mother in verse 11, and Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Okay. In verse 12, it says, my father peradventure will feel me, and I shall seem to him as a deceiver, and I shall bring a curse upon me and not a blessing. And his mother said unto him, Upon me be thy curse, my son. Only obey my voice and go fetch me them. So just go get the things that I told you to get. So his concern, and you'll notice this, Jacob's concern is not so much, I don't feel comfortable tricking dad. That's not so much his concern. And I don't think that his is necessarily the same as Rebekah's. I think Rebekah's is from a place of wisdom, and it's from a place of forethought and of truly trying to do God's will. Jacob, just from the stories and the context of the character of Jacob in the Bible, I don't think at this point in Genesis 27 that Jacob is spiritually mature enough to be attuned enough to the Holy Spirit, attuned enough to God's will, to determine the same things Rebekah has. So then why isn't he bothered by tricking his father? Jacob was a deceiver. He was a trickster. This is what he was. He had no problem tricking anybody. His brother came to him on a hot, sweltering day, about to pass out from heat, and said, I need something to sustain me. And his brother said, well, you can pass out in the heat unless you want to give me your birthright. That was the kind of person Jacob was at this point in his life. We see after this that this trickster stuff even comes into play with his relationship with his uncle Laban. And this is just sort of how his life goes. He's a trickster. And these tricks go back and forth on him until he matures spiritually to the point where he's a different kind of person altogether. So his lack of concern for this is from a more immature place, and not necessarily so spiritually mature as his mother. But he went and fetched and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory meat, such as his father loved. And Rebekah took goodly raiment of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them upon Jacob, her younger son. So at this point, at their age, these were what we would consider to be grown men. But they lived at home, and that was the culture in Bible times. When you got married, you didn't go off and get your own place and physically separate from father and mother. That's not what Genesis chapter 2 is talking about. It's talking about, or chapter 3, it's talking about a spiritual, a relationship-wise separation in your mind, you're in your heart. In your soul, you're separated from mom and dad. You're no longer under their authority. You're in that partnership with that person. So these two boys, they still lived at home. That's the way it was in the Bible times. So his clothes and stuff are in the house with Rebekah. And so he took his raiments, Esau's raiments, and put them on Jacob. And then she put the skin of the kid goats upon his hands. She literally put the skin of a goat on top of her son's arms. Yeah, for you guys still digesting your dinner, let me put that thought in your head. On top of his arms, so that you'll see in a minute why. And she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So Jacob wasn't a hunter. He wasn't versed in preparing, killing, preparing, cooking, and eating, the whole process of that with his food. But mom was. She knows how her husband likes his food, so she prepared it for him and then gave it to Jacob to give to Isaac. So then he came unto his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. Who art thou, my son? So you get on up there in age, your hearing isn't quite what it used to be, and you can't necessarily make out who each person is. Because you would imagine as a parent, you would know the difference between one son or the other son. I don't really have that sort of situation. I have one son and one daughter. I can very much tell the difference in their voices. And I imagine that's only going to get better as time goes on and not worse. But I did grow up, it was me and my brother Josh in the house. And I do know that at times you listen to me talk, or at times when you listen to Josh talk, if you don't see the face, if you don't see the body of the person, it's hard to necessarily know who's talking. Right. So, like, usually if you can see, I was like, okay, the sun is blinding everybody off the top of that head. That's Josh. Gotcha. Okay. Or you say, okay, that mop of hair has never been combed a day in its life. That's Matt. Okay, got it. You know. But this is what Isaac was dealing with. His eyes were dim, his ear, hearing not as good as it used to be. So he's got to say, who is this? Who are you? And Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. Okay, so now we have a controversial topic. Okay, Jacob just lied to his father. He lied to his father. Is this a sin? Because most people would tell you lying is a sin. And I think that it depends, in my opinion, it depends on the heart. If your attempt is to deceive, then I think, yes, if your attempt is selfish and it's only for you and you're not in concern for anybody else or how it affects them and you're just lying to save your own skin or to get something for yourself or whatever, then yes, lying is absolutely a sin. But we see certain occasions in the Bible where God will use a lie so that his will may be done. You see that here. In Genesis 27:19, he lies to his father and receives the blessing that God intended for him to receive all along by using this lie. You can also look at the harlot Rahab. In the story of the spies, the two spies, they go into Jericho and they spy out the land of Jericho and they come to the house of a hooker. And this hooker's name is Rahab. And they go in and they say, hey, the soldiers are trying to find us and kill us. And she goes, hey, go climb up on top of the roof. They're not going to find you there. I'll send them the other direction. So they say, okay, great. So they climb up on top of the roof, knock on the door. And they say, have you seen any spies in here? Any men from out of town and aren't supposed to be here? And she says, yes, I have. They went that way. If you hurry, you can catch them. She lies. A hooker lies to the police for 2 illegal immigrants. That's literally what happens in that story. I'm not making that up. That's literally what happened. And yet God honors that. He honors that so much that they make an oath that when they go to take Jericho, her and everybody in her house at that moment will be saved, brought out of the city, and will be made a part of Israel. They'll be made members of the nation of Israel as it grows and blooms and prospers in the Lord. And if that's not enough for you, you say, okay, well, I'm not sure if that's God blessing her for it. Rahab is a part of the family lineage of Jesus Christ. She's part of the bloodline of Jesus. And you don't think that God blessed that? He absolutely did. There's no doubting that. So it's more complicated than just it's always right or it's always wrong. It's the matter of deception. And in your heart, what are you trying to do? The Bible says, he that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. So sometimes knowing what sin is isn't as simple as, well, this is what my Sunday school teacher told me growing up. No, read the book for yourself and find out for yourself. Don't let us determine it for you, because I might get it wrong. I could be wrong tonight. But so could the other people you've heard study the Bible. The only way you can know for sure is do your own homework. Go get the Bible. Go read it for yourself. Download 1 million free Bible apps on your phone. Go download it and read it yourself. Only way you can be sure. So this lie, he tells his father, he says, I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, in other words, what you asked me to do. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. And Isaac said unto his son, how is it that thou hast found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord thy God brought it to me. That is another lie. And this is a kind of lie where it's a Christian lie. You know exactly what I mean. She knows exactly what I mean. I heard her chuckle. It's a Christian lie. It's a lie where you say, well, technically, it's true because God blessed me by having a good mother, and my mother raised me, and she takes care of me. So when my mother brought me the venison, really that was God bringing it to me as well. So, I mean, really it wasn't a lie. That is how Christians lie. When they say, I've heard some of the craziest stuff in the world, where they'll tell the pastor, I can't make it to church today because I've got so much to do. I've got so many errands to do that I just can't make it today. We've got work tomorrow, we've got school tomorrow, and I've got so much to get caught up on and do. I'm not going to be able to make it to church today. And then they will send somebody to the store to get like toilet paper or paper plates or just anything so that they didn't technically lie to the preacher. You are still lying, right? That is still a lie because it's not about what you technically did or technically didn't do in the court of law and so forth and so on. And it's about the intentions of the heart. Were you being dishonest to the man so that you could not feel guilty, and also not be judged by that preacher? The answer is yes, no matter how clever you were with it. Right? So the same thing is true here. So he says, God brought it to me. We could say, well, I mean, from a certain matter of perspective, that's true. Well, the only perspective that matters is God's. Right? And from God's perspective, it was dishonest. Right? But again, I mean, God uses this to bless Jacob and to change him from Jacob to Israel. Right? So he sets him on this path. Right? And so, like I said, a very intricate, complex sort of thing that we're reading about here, and that the Christian life is. Right? You have to feel out the Holy Spirit in your life and determine what God wants you to do. Verse 21, Isaac said unto Jacob, Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. So evidently Isaac really, really wanting to be sure that it's Esau. Evidently there's been some debate about this at night in the bedroom when they're going to bed. Rebecca saying, honey, I don't think that this is, I don't know that Esau is the one that should be receiving this. And Isaac saying, honey, trust me, I know what I'm doing, okay? I know this. I'm Abraham's son. I know what I'm doing. You got to believe that I'm making the right choice here. Yeah, but I really don't feel like you are, Isaac. I really feel strongly about this. And he says, oh, we'll talk about it in the morning. I'm so tired. And then they don't, because you know how it is when you're married. Not for me, but for other people, I understand it. Because I'll keep her up all night long until we get it resolved. We don't let the sun go down upon our disagreements, which is the way I think it should be. But evidently they had been disagreeing about this, couldn't come to a conclusion, so this is why this is happening. And so he says, okay, well, let me feel you. I can't hear that it's my son. I can't see that it's my son. Let me feel that it's my son. Because Esau was a hairy man. And it says, Jacob went near unto Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice. So he could tell that it was Jacob, but he couldn't for sure. You know what I'm saying? Like he's like, okay, it sounds like Jacob, but his hearing, like I was saying earlier, is so bad, he can't be sure that it's Jacob. He can't be sure that it's Esau. So he's trying to figure this out. And he says, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So Esau, and he discerned him not, verse 23, because his hands were hairy as his brother Esau's hands. Can I just take a minute to point out that Esau was so stinking hairy that mom took the skin of a dead goat and covered it over his arms. Dad touched the skin of the dead goat on top of Isaac's hand and said, yeah, that feels like Esau's hair. It's nasty, but also how hairy was Esau? That his arm felt like the skin of a goat. Goodness gracious, his poor wife. But he couldn't tell because of the goat skin. It made him feel hairy as well, so he blessed him. He gave the blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. And some might say, well, does this really count if it's deceived in this way? And it absolutely does, mostly because the blessing doesn't really come from Isaac. Right? And we're understanding this. The blessing doesn't come from Isaac. It comes from God. The blessing comes from the Lord. Right? It's just that these things he's explaining in this moment are being explained to the son he wants to be blessed. But God still chose Jacob, and God made it so that the things he's about to learn from his father, he's in the room for. So he says in verse 25, he said, "Bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's venison, that my soul may bless thee." And he brought it near to him that he did eat, and brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said unto him, "Come now and kiss me, my son." And he came near and kissed him on the cheek. You may know that custom from different places around the world. And he smelled the smell of his raiment and blessed him. So he's smelling now he's doing that to get close enough to smell the clothes, make sure they're Esau's clothes. He's really, really making sure that Isaac gets it Isaac's way. And I'm not sure that was the best course of action, mostly because God makes sure that's not what happens. Folks, you can't have it your way. This isn't Burger King. Life isn't Burger King. You can't have it your way. This is God's world, and he's going to have it his way. Right? We can either get on board or life can be difficult. But either way, God is going to have his way. So he blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field which the Lord hath blessed. Therefore God give thee the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee." And this is where the blessing becomes very important. He says, "Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee." Now, the last bit of that, "Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee," that is from the Abrahamic covenant. You may remember we talked about this maybe in last week, maybe in the week before that. I think the week before that, or 3 weeks ago instead of 2 weeks ago. You know what I mean. Basically, this is what God told Abraham, that I will bless him that blesseth thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. This is what he told Abraham. And Abraham's promise, his covenant, his blessing was passed down to Isaac. Isaac was his only heir, so it had to come down to Isaac. Well, now Isaac has 2 boys, and this blessing is being passed down to them. Notice also this phrase here, and we're going to park it here for a minute because it is kind of important. He says, "Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee." And it brings us to a thought. I'm going to look up a verse here in just a second, but it brings us to a thought that has been a matter of pretty heavy debate in theology and doctrine for couple hundred years. People are still arguing about this. And it comes down to this thing of what is more formally called Calvinism. Now, Calvinism is named Calvinism because it comes from a man named John Calvin. John Calvin, reading through Scripture, determined and believed that there is what they refer to as the elect. And the elect are so called because God chose those people before the worlds began that they would accept his salvation, and those that don't accept his salvation are because they're not the elect and they haven't been chosen by God to be one of the ones capable of understanding and receiving his salvation. And so when the church or Christians fail to accurately witness to somebody, or we're chasing people around the world away by, lighting things on fire and throwing them at them, it's not our fault. It's just that God chose that before the worlds began. I didn't fail, It's not my fault. I was destined to fail at this from the beginning. And that's just not the case, right? And one of the things that people of Calvinism will debate is a particular phrase on this subject we're talking about tonight. Let me look up this phrase real quick. You guys can't see this, and I kind of appreciate that. Okay, yeah, so right here, Romans 9 and verse 13. I'm going to give it some context. It says, it's a concept that's gone on for the whole chapter, so I'm not going to be able to begin at a just really grammatically perfect place. But the best we can do, I think, here is in verse 10. It says, and not only this, because the whole thing, as you can see, is about Israel and their past, their present, and their future concerning God's will for Israel. That's what this whole chapter is about. So in verse 10 he says, and not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one, even by our father Isaac, for the children not yet being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So these are phrases that those of Calvinism will use. They'll highlight words here like election. You see, God, the purpose of God according to election. And they'll say things like here, not of works, but of him that calleth, as though God calls people to his will or else not. And so they'll come down here, and it was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger, and that was told to her when they were born. In verse 13 it says, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. So you combine that with the phrase up here, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand. So in other words, that God had chosen before these boys were even born who he would love or who he would hate. That God determines before people are born who they love or who they hate. When you read it like this, it sounds very convincing, doesn't it? I might have just convinced you to be Calvinist tonight. You might not like that truth comes to you in such what seemingly irrefutable way, but it would seem pretty difficult to argue against. Except, we've been piecing this together, right? We're missing whole chunks of this thing, right? Because the context and the whole message of what's being talked about isn't salvation, right? In the context of what they're being called to isn't whether or not they're going to be saved. It's who's going to carry forward God's specific work. Who's going to do this specific thing for God? Not who gets to go to heaven and who doesn't, but who's going to do this particular job that God has in store for them. That's what they're being called to. That's what they're being elected to. Right? And also look at this. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. That's pretty convincing, but look here in verse 12. It was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger. We take a big old 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun and boom, blow a hole right in Calvinism with that verse. The elder shall serve the younger. Now let's backtrack to read what we just read about this blessing. In verse 29, he said that Jacob would, and I quote, be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. That the elder shall serve the younger. Folks, we're not talking about the specific people, Jacob, and the person of Jacob, and the person of Esau. Okay? Because Jacob would go on to become Israel, of whom the nation of Israel would come. And do you know who comes from Esau? A group of people called the Edomites. Right? And they, throughout Israel's history, are always very near and close to Israel. But Israel is God's chosen people. They're the ones that God blesses and favors and goes into battle with. Never in all the Bible, you read through every chapter of everywhere in the Bible, never one time will you ever read where Esau served Jacob. That never happened. From this moment onward, Jacob is afraid that Esau is going to murder him. Never one time do you ever see Esau serve Jacob. Those two people specifically. You'd say, why does that matter? I'm going to get to that. Hang in there with me. Okay? Because also I want to point out the plurality. Right? What did they say? Brother? No. Brethren. Multiple. Right? Mother's son? No. Mother's sons. Multiple. But Jacob only had one brother. It was Jacob and it was Esau. So who else could we be talking about here except for the fact that we're not talking about Jacob and we're not talking about Esau. We're talking about Israel and we're talking about Edom. God didn't love literal Jacob and hate literal Esau. He loved both of them because for God so loved the world. Right? So it's not a matter of election. It's not a matter of God choosing who gets to be saved and who doesn't. Right? It's a matter of getting his will done. And his will was for Jacob and not for Esau. Now Esau could take that and be bitter about it and ruin his whole life over it and build his whole life over this thing of bitterness he had toward his brother. Or he could accept the blessing that God did give him in his life and build a life around that and choose to be happy and blessed in the Lord. And folks, when we choose to stay angry and bitter at the things we didn't get, we fight God's will. Because the reason we didn't get them is not because, oh, somebody cheated me out of it. It's not because, oh man, this man stole it away from me, or this woman took that away from me, or that relationship should have been mine, but they stole that partner away from me, or oh, that job or that career or that opportunity should have been mine, but somebody else stole it away from me, or lied about me and cheated me out of there and really messed me over, and now I've lost all those opportunities. No. Those opportunities were taken away from you because they weren't God's will for your life. So instead of focusing on all those things, focus instead on what is God's will for my life. Let me work on finding that, and then I'll try to build a life around that, and that God will bless. God, I promise you right now, God will bless that. You say, God, just let me know your will and I'll do it. He'll bless that. It may take some time to get where you want to get, but God will bless that. So we see the blessing that was taken from Isaac, but we also see, I wanted to point out real quick, he finds out, and they're so upset, and they're weeping one to another. Esau lifted up his voice and wept. Esau asked this question, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me even also. And Isaac, his father, answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven above, and thy sword and by the sword shalt thou live, and thou shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. Right? So again, you can see how, at least in part, this is not about Jacob and Esau, them specifically. It's about their lineage, their families that were to come, and the nations that would come from these two men. But also notice that Esau had a blessing as well. The elder shall serve the younger wasn't considered a curse. He didn't call this a curse. The Bible never calls it a curse. They call it a blessing. He was blessed to serve. Serving feels subservient. But can I tell you, serving isn't subservient? That you are not less valuable to somebody because you served them. You are not less important than somebody else because you serve. Serving doesn't make you subservient. It makes you humble. Right? This was still a blessing. Look at all they said. The fatness of the land and so forth. The fatness of the earth. The dew from heaven above. And he has this blessing. And I want to, before we're done this evening, look one more time at Hebrews 11, at this verse we talked about with all of this in context. And we'll see this ourselves. I haven't passed it up. Yeah, down here. Okay. Yeah, verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. They both received a blessing. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Now, when you learn about this in Sunday school as a kid, you learn that Jacob stole Esau's blessing, the stolen blessing. That's what they call it. But that's not what happened. Jacob got the blessing he was always meant to have. And Esau got a blessing as well. They were both blessed. That Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Not about their moment in life that they were in right there, not even about their own immediate lives, but they were blessed concerning the things that would happen with their families that would eventually grow into being nations. Right? Not concerning them or their lifetime or their current events, but concerning things to come. Right? So in other words, sometimes it takes a while to see why God makes the decisions that he does. And when we do finally someday understand it all, we'll appreciate it. Sometimes you miss out on things you think you want, and then sometimes you find out the things you wanted weren't really things that were going to make you happy at all. And sometimes God forces you down a path that's even better than the one you had planned for yourself. That's what happened with Jacob and Esau. Sometimes that's what happens to us. And again, we can only ever receive these things by faith. All of this by faith. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. And that is our lesson for this evening. We'll be back next week talking about Jacob and his blessings for his boys and so forth. And his bones and everything, talking about Jacob and then Joseph and so forth. And hopefully it'll be hopefully it'll be an encouraging lesson to you. And we'll be back on Sunday morning for our Sunday morning or Sunday school hour. And then this Sunday is Children's Sunday. So we're not going to have a normal adult church service. Once a year, we are turning our adult church service into junior church. And it's going to be a good time. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the love and the comments and so forth. Thank you for all the likes and thumbs and so forth. And like I said, we'll be back So until then, guys, bye. All right, you YouTube guys are still here, but I'm going now.